Why the super empath is the only one who can break the avoidant cycle. Have you ever been the one who feels too much? The one who keeps giving, keeps understanding, and keeps hoping that maybe this time love will stay. And yet, somehow, you always find yourself loving someone who runs just when things get close. If that sounds familiar, you might not be broken. You might actually be the only one powerful enough to break the patterns. You see, in relationships, there's a dance. The empath moves toward connection, and the avoidant moves away from it. One is fueled by the fear of losing love, and the other by the fear of being consumed by it. Now here's where it gets interesting. The empath's superpower, their ability to feel deeply, is also their greatest challenge. Because when you care that much, you try to fix, to heal, to prove your worth. But the truth is, that cycle never ends until you decide to stop chasing emotional safety in someone who's afraid of giving it. See, the avoidant isn't your enemy. They're your mirror. They show you where you still abandon yourself for love. They teach you what parts of you still believe that love has to be earned, not received. And the moment a super empath stops trying to be chosen and starts choosing themselves, the entire cycle shatters. Because when you hold boundaries with warmth, when you stay open without losing yourself, the avoidant can no longer run the same pattern. You stop dancing to their rhythm, and suddenly the music changes. That's the power of the super empath. Not to fix others, but to lead with self-respect so powerful that love becomes safe for both people. When we talk about the avoidance cycle, we're really talking about two people who are both afraid. But afraid of very different things. One fears being trapped, the other fears being abandoned. One pulls away when things get too close, the other moves closer when things start to feel uncertain. It looks like one person doesn't care and the other cares too much. But what's actually happening is a loop of fear playing out through opposite behaviors. And the wild part is, both people are craving the same thing underneath it all: safety. The avoidant is often misunderstood. People label them cold, detached, or emotionally unavailable, but that's rarely the full truth. They've learned somewhere along the way that closeness equals danger. Maybe they grew up in a home where affection came with conditions, or where emotions were overwhelming or unpredictable. So, they built independence not as a strength at first, but as protection. They tell themselves, "I'm fine on my own." And for the most part, they believe it. But that's not peace, that's defense. Then the empath enters. The empath is deeply intuitive, tuned in, and has an incredible ability to sense emotional shifts in others. When they meet an avoidant, they pick up on the emotional distance immediately. Instead of seeing it as a boundary, they feel it as a challenge. If I can just love them the right way, if I can show them I'm safe, maybe they'll finally open up. The empath's heart sees the potential in the avoidant, not the pattern. And that's where the dance begins. The avoidant senses this pursuit and starts to feel pressure. The closeness triggers the very fear they've spent years managing, the fear of being engulfed, of losing their autonomy, of being emotionally exposed. So, they pull back to breathe, to regain control. But when they do, the empath feels rejected, unsafe, and desperate to restore connection. So they chase, they overgive, they explain, they justify, they wait. The more the empath reaches, the more the avoidant retreats. The more the avoidant retreats, the more the empath reaches. And just like that, both are locked in a dance of fear masquerading as love. It's easy to think the avoidant is the one causing the pain because they're the one running. But the truth is, both are equally trapped. The avoidant runs from intimacy because it feels dangerous. The empath runs toward it because distance feels dangerous. Both are operating from wounds, just different sides of the same coin. The empath's wound whispers, "If I love hard enough, I won't be left." The avoidant's wound whispers, "If I stay too close, I'll lose myself." When you understand that, the judgment fades. You stop seeing villains and victims, and you start seeing two nervous systems trying to survive love. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about who's aware enough to break the loop. The empath has the unique capacity to sense emotional energy, which is why they're often the first to notice when something feels off. That sensitivity is what makes them capable of breaking the pattern. But first, they have to recognize that their drive to fix, to heal, to hold on, it's not actually love. It's fear wearing the mask of devotion. It's the nervous system saying, "I need to secure this connection to feel safe." The avoidance withdrawal triggers that survival response, and suddenly the empath isn't loving anymore. They're trying to regulate their own panic through the other person. Meanwhile, the avoidant is doing the same thing in reverse. Their withdrawal isn't punishment, it's regulation. When the emotional intensity gets too high, their system shuts down to feel safe. It's not that they don't care, it's that caring feels overwhelming. But to the empath, that shutdown feels like abandonment, so they try harder, which makes the avoidant retreat further, and the cycle feeds itself like a fire no one knows how to put out. The key to understanding this is realizing that both people are reacting to fear, not to each other. Every message, every silence, every distance or overreach is the body trying to protect itself from something it doesn't fully understand. That's why logic doesn't work in these moments. You can't reason someone out of a fear they learned before they even had language for it. You can only create safety, and that starts with awareness. When the empath finally steps back, not out of anger, but out of clarity, the rhythm of the dance starts to change. They stop interpreting distance as rejection and start recognizing it as fear. They stop trying to close the gap and instead hold space for themselves in the discomfort. And that's when something powerful happens. The cycle loses its grip because once one person stops reacting from fear, the pattern has nothing left to feed on. The avoidant no longer needs to run because they're no longer being chased. The empath no longer needs to chase because they've found stability within themselves. The dynamic that once felt magnetic but painful begins to dissolve. And what's left is space. Space for both people to breathe, to see each other without projection, to feel connection without control. The avoidance cycle isn't a punishment, and it isn't a flaw. It's a mirror. It reflects the places where love has been confused with survival, and until someone, often the empath, sees that clearly, it will keep repeating. Not because love is cruel, but because it's always trying to bring our deepest fears to the surface so we can finally heal them. Empathy is one of the most beautiful traits a person can have. It's what allows us to connect, to understand, and to love on a deeper level than most people ever reach. But empathy without boundaries doesn't stay beautiful for long. It becomes exhausting, confusing, and quietly destructive. When someone feels everything but doesn't know where they end and someone else begins, their compassion starts turning against them. What began as love starts to feel like emotional survival. An empath's instinct is to give. They sense pain and want to ease it. They sense distance and want to close it. They sense tension and want to soothe it. Their gift is that they can read a room, feel the emotional undercurrents, and adapt to keep harmony alive. But when that instinct goes unchecked, empathy stops being a strength and starts being a form of self-abandonment. You start adjusting so much to other people's emotions that you forget what your own feel like. You begin walking on emotional eggshells, not because someone told you to, but because your nervous system has learned to equate peace with people pleasing. This pattern often shows up subtly. You start saying, "Hoot's fine," when it isn't. You downplay your needs because you don't want to seem too much. You tell yourself, "I understand why they're like that," so many times that you end up justifying behavior that actually hurts you. You start carrying emotional responsibility for both people in the relationship, thinking that if you can just stay calm, patient, and understanding enough, you'll finally earn the security you crave. But the more you bend, the less you're seen, and the less you're seen, the harder you try to prove your worth through your care. It becomes a loop of silent self-erasure disguised as love. What makes this so tricky is that it feels noble. Empaths are often praised for their patience and compassion. Friends might even admire their ability to see the good in everyone. But empathy without boundaries doesn't create love, it creates dependency. It teaches the other person that you'll always absorb the impact, that you'll always stretch one more time, that you'll always say yes when your heart is quietly whispering no. And over time, that dynamic doesn't make the relationship stronger, it makes it unbalanced. One person keeps giving, and the other learns that they don't have to. At first, it can even look like power. The empath believes, "I'm the one holding this together. I'm the stable one. I'm the healer." But what's really happening is emotional over-functioning. You're doing the work for two people, and it feels like connection only because you're carrying all the weight. Deep down, it's not love that's driving you, it's fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being seen as difficult, fear that if you stop giving, the relationship will collapse. This fear makes empathy reactive instead of responsive. When you feel someone's pain, you rush to fix it, not because you're heartless if you don't, But because their discomfort triggers your own anxiety, their silence feels like rejection, their anger feels like danger, their withdrawal feels like loss. And instead of allowing them to feel what's theirs, you absorb it, you manage it, you shift around it. That's not empathy anymore. That's emotional fusion, and it costs you your peace. True empathy isn't about carrying other people's emotions. It's about understanding them while staying anchored in your own. Boundaries don't make you less loving. They make your love sustainable. When you know where you end and the other person begins, you can care without collapsing. You can witness someone struggle without making it your responsibility to heal it. That kind of empathy creates respect instead of rescue. But getting there takes courage, because setting boundaries for an empath feels like betrayal at first. Saying no feels like rejection. Saying, I can't hold this for you right now, feels selfish. You'll feel guilt. You'll feel the pull to fix things like you always have. But that discomfort isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're reclaiming yourself. You're teaching your nervous system that love doesn't require self-erasure. When empathy is rooted in boundaries, it transforms from a survival strategy into a conscious choice. You can be present with someone's emotions without drowning in them. You can offer compassion without needing to be the solution. You can listen deeply without losing your voice in the process. You stop trying to earn love through sacrifice and start sharing love through authenticity. In that space, relationships begin to shift. The people who relied on your over-giving either learn to meet you halfway, or they drift away because your self-respect disrupts the dynamic they were comfortable with. And while that can feel painful, it's actually the most freeing thing that can happen to an empath. You begin to attract people who value your emotional depth instead of exploiting it. People who see your sensitivity as a strength, not a resource to drain. Empathy without boundaries teaches you to shrink to stay connected. Empathy with boundaries teaches you to expand without fear. The difference isn't in how much you care, it's in how much of yourself you're willing to lose in the process. Real empathy allows both people to exist fully. It honors your heart without handing it over. It lets you love from fullness, not emptiness. And when you finally master that, your compassion stops being your cage and becomes your freedom. Awareness is what turns pain into power. It's the quiet moment when the empath finally pauses and says, wait, this isn't love, this is a pattern. Before awareness, everything feels like chaos. You react automatically, chase connection, interpret distance as rejection, and confuse intensity with intimacy. But when awareness enters, even for a moment, the entire dynamic starts to shift. You begin to see the cycle, not from inside it, but from above it. You start to understand that what's happening isn't about who's good or bad. It's about two nervous systems trying to feel safe in opposite ways. For the empath, awareness often comes after exhaustion. There's a point where you've explained, forgiven, and adjusted so many times that you start to feel invisible in your own story. You wake up and realize you've been carrying a relationship that should have been built by two people. You start to question why you're always the one bridging the gap, always the one trying to decode silence, always the one holding emotional space that no one holds for you. That's when something inside you starts whispering, maybe this isn't love. Maybe this is a cycle I've been taught to repeat. Awareness is uncomfortable because it strips away illusion. It forces you to look at what's really happening without the cushioning of hope or denial. You start seeing how your empathy has been wired for survival. You notice the moments when you felt your partner pulling away, and instead of stepping back to protect your peace, you leaned in harder. You start seeing how you confuse peace with people, pleasing, how your instinct to fix comes from fear, not strength. And that realization, as painful as it is the first step toward freedom. When you're not aware, you're reactive. Every text, silence, or change in tone triggers an emotional storm. You start solving problems that aren't even yours because you can't stand the discomfort of someone else's distance. But when awareness grows, you learn to observe your emotions without obeying them. You start noticing, my anxiety just kicked in because they're withdrawing. That doesn't mean I have to chase. That's awareness in action. It creates a pause between what you feel and what you do. And that tiny pause is where transformation begins. For the avoidant, awareness is equally important, though often slower to arrive. They've built an identity around independence and self-sufficiency, so emotional closeness can feel threatening. But awareness helps them see that their need for space isn't always about freedom. It's about fear of vulnerability. They begin to realize that intimacy doesn't have to mean loss of self. That connection doesn't have to be control. When both people become aware of their patterns, the relationship stops being a battlefield and starts becoming a mirror. Awareness doesn't mean you stop feeling the urge to repeat the old cycle. It means you start catching yourself before it runs your life. You begin to see the moment your inner child panics when someone pulls away. You notice the impulse to send that reassuring message, to explain one more time, to fix what's not yours to fix. But instead of reacting, you breathe. You hold space for the discomfort. You learn to tolerate the unease that comes from not rescuing someone who's not asking to be saved. That's not detachment, it's maturity. The most powerful part of awareness is that it gives you choice. Before awareness, everything feels compulsory. You think, I can't help it, this is just who I am. But with awareness, you realize I can feel deeply and still choose boundaries. I can love someone and still walk away if it costs me my peace. You stop acting out of compulsion and start acting out of clarity. That's when love starts feeling lighter, cleaner, and more real. In relationships, especially between an empath and an avoidant, awareness is contagious. When the empath stops over-functioning and starts holding space instead of control, it subtly invites the avoidant to come closer. When the empath stops reacting to distance with panic, the avoidant stops associating intimacy with pressure. Awareness in one person can recalibrate the nervous system of the entire relationship. It's not manipulation, it's leadership. You're leading through emotional consciousness instead of emotional chaos. But awareness is not glamorous. It's not a single moment of enlightenment. It's daily work. It's catching yourself when you're tempted to make excuses for someone's lack of effort. It's noticing when you downplay your needs to keep things peaceful. It's realizing that love without reciprocity isn't love, it's emotional labor. And it's forgiving yourself for all the times you didn't know better. Awareness doesn't demand perfection, it demands honesty. Over time, awareness becomes your compass. It stops you from chasing what hurts. It helps you see red flags as facts, not challenges to overcome. It reminds you that your sensitivity isn't the problem, it's your lack of boundaries around it that is. It teaches you that you can be open-hearted without being open-wounded. And with that, relationships stop being about survival and start being about growth. When you become aware, you stop asking, why don't they love me enough? And start asking, why am I settling for less than I deserve? You realize you can't change someone else's capacity for connection, but you can change your participation in the pattern. That's what awareness gives you, the power to choose differently, to love differently, to finally break the cycle that once defined you. Self-validation is the moment you stop waiting for someone else to tell you that you're enough. It's the quiet shift from seeking reassurance outside yourself to giving it from within. For the super empath, this is often the hardest but most transformative part of healing the avoidance cycle, because for most of their life, their sense of worth has been tied to how others respond to their care. They feel secure when they're appreciated, wanted, or needed. When that validation disappears, especially in a relationship with someone emotionally distant, the empath starts to panic. They read the silence as rejection, the space as abandonment, and in that moment, their entire identity begins to shake. The need for reassurance isn't weakness, it's human. Everyone wants to feel loved, valued, and seen. But when your self-worth depends entirely on another person's response, you hand them the power to define your emotional stability. The avoidant partner's natural tendency to withdraw activates that dependency in the empath like a siren. Suddenly, the empath is no longer responding from love, they're reacting from fear. The fear that if they don't fix it, if they don't reach out, if they don't prove their worth, the relationship will fall apart. That's where the cycle feeds itself. The avoidant pulls away to feel safe, and the empath moves closer to feel safe. Both are acting from insecurity, but the empath's lack of self-validation gives the dynamic its fuel. Every time they chase reassurance, through messages, through caretaking, through over-explaining, they're telling their nervous system, my peace depends on this person's approval. The more they do it, the more disconnected they feel. It's emotional self-abandonment disguised as love. Breaking that pattern starts when the empath begins to validate their own feelings, even when they're not being validated by someone else. It's the moment you say to yourself, I feel anxious because I care deeply, and that's okay. I feel hurt because I expected more, and that's human. I don't need them to acknowledge this for it to be real. That's self-validation. It's choosing to believe your emotions matter without external permission. At first, it feels unnatural. When you've spent your life equating love with affirmation, it feels cold to comfort yourself. But over time, it becomes the most empowering thing you can do. Because when you can hold space for your own emotions, you no longer depend on inconsistent people to regulate them for you. The avoidant silence stops feeling like a verdict and starts feeling like information. You begin to see their behavior as a reflection of their own emotional limits, not your lack of worth. Self-validation doesn't mean you stop wanting love or connection. It means you stop using someone else's response as the measure of your value. You start giving yourself what you've been begging for: acceptance, patience, understanding. You tell yourself, it's okay to want closeness, but I can be whole even without it. That mindset changes everything. It shifts your energy from chasing to choosing, from proving to allowing. You stop trying to earn love and start embodying it. In relationships, that shift is magnetic. When you validate yourself, you no longer approach others with emotional hunger. You bring presence instead of pressure. You stop needing constant reassurance because you already trust yourself to handle uncertainty. Ironically, that's when true connection becomes possible. The avoidant partner who once felt suffocated by your pursuit starts to sense safety in your steadiness. They're not being chased anymore, they're being invited. And while not every avoidant will accept that invitation, those who are capable of growth often do. But self-validation isn't just about romantic dynamics. It's about identity. It's about rebuilding your sense of worth from the inside out. It's realizing that you don't need to be understood perfectly to be valid, that someone else's inability to love you fully doesn't mean you're unlovable. It's knowing your feelings are real even when they're not recognized. It's choosing to stay present with your own emotions instead of outsourcing them to someone who can't meet you there. When you validate yourself, you stop negotiating your boundaries to earn affection. You stop explaining your needs over and over to people who aren't listening. You stop confusing emotional crumbs for connection, because you finally understand that love built on self-rejection isn't love, it's dependency. And dependency will always feel unstable because it asks someone else to do the job only you can do make you feel safe inside your own skin. There's a moment that happens in every empath's healing journey where they realize they no longer crave the same people they once chased. The silence that used to hurt now feels peaceful. The absence of validation no longer triggers panic. That's not indifference, it's freedom. It means you've learned to anchor yourself so deeply in your own worth that no one's approval can shake it. You can still love deeply, but you no longer confuse validation with connection. When you reach that place, the avoidant cycle collapses, because without your need for reassurance, the pattern loses its power. You're no longer the pursuer, you're the anchor. And that shift, that quiet, grounded self-assurance, is what finally breaks the loop. You stop searching for safety in someone else's emotional availability and start creating it within yourself. And that's the moment you realize self-validation isn't the absence of love, it's the foundation of it. Love becomes something entirely different when you stop chasing it as a means to heal your wounds and start experiencing it as a space to grow. The empath and the avoidant both come from places where love once felt conditional, something that had to be earned, protected, or controlled. The empath learned that giving and overextending was the way to keep love close, while the avoidant learned that withdrawing and creating distance was the way to keep love safe. Both strategies are attempts to manage fear, not expressions of genuine intimacy. When love is redefined, not as rescue, but as reciprocity, the pattern starts to dissolve. For the super empath, this redefinition begins with an uncomfortable truth: not every act of giving is love. Sometimes giving is fear in disguise. It's a way of saying, if I do enough, they won't leave. It's love turned into negotiation. The empath's instinct to fix, to heal, to anticipate every need comes from the hope that if they make themselves indispensable, they'll finally be safe. But that kind of love is rooted in scarcity. It drains rather than nourishes because it's built on the belief that connection must be earned. Real love, the kind that breaks cycles, doesn't require you to shrink or overextend. It doesn't demand you to prove your worth through sacrifice. It asks you to show up as you are, whole, grounded, and self-respecting, and to invite another person to do the same. Reciprocity doesn't mean equal effort every second. It means mutual awareness, mutual care, and mutual accountability. It's love that moves both ways, not love that survives only when one person does the emotional heavy lifting. When love is redefined this way, the empath starts to approach relationships differently. They stop asking, how can I make them love me? And start asking, is this love mutual? Is it nourishing me too? That shift changes everything. The empath begins to see that love isn't something you win, it's something you share. And if sharing it consistently drains you, it's not love, it's imbalance. The avoidant, on the other hand, begins to experience a different kind of safety. When an empath loves with boundaries and self-respect, it disarms the avoidant's fear of being consumed. Suddenly, connection doesn't feel like control. Closeness doesn't feel like pressure. The empath's self-contained love creates a stable emotional environment where the avoidant can begin to relax, to explore vulnerability without fear of being engulfed. In that dynamic, both people can finally breathe, but redefining love requires courage because it means unlearning everything that once felt familiar. For the empath, chaos used to feel like passion. The highs and lows, the waiting, the uncertainty, all of it felt alive, even though it was draining. Healthy love can feel boring at first because it doesn't trigger the same adrenaline rush of survival. It feels calm, it feels stable, and for someone who has associated love with emotional turbulence, that calm can feel unnatural. But over time, that peace starts to feel like home. Love redefined also changes how you handle conflict. In the old pattern, conflict triggered panic for the empath and withdrawal for the avoidant. Now, awareness and self-validation turn conflict into communication. Instead of chasing, the empath expresses. Instead of running, the avoidant listens. The relationship becomes a dialogue rather than a tug of war. That's what reciprocity looks like. It's not perfection, it's partnership. This new kind of love doesn't avoid vulnerability, it honors it. It doesn't mean you won't get hurt. It means you'll stay true to yourself even when you do. It means you stop molding yourself to be loved and start trusting that being authentic is what creates real intimacy. You no longer confuse attachment with connection or chemistry with compatibility. You recognize that love isn't about saving someone from their fears, but standing beside them as they face them. When love is rooted in reciprocity, both people grow. The empath learns containment and boundaries. The avoidant learns openness and trust. They meet in the middle, not out of fear, but out of choice. The empath no longer uses love to fill emptiness, and the avoidant no longer uses distance to avoid pain. Instead, both choose connection because it enhances their lives, not because it defines their worth. And perhaps the most beautiful part of redefined love is that it feels peaceful, not performative. It doesn't rely on constant reassurance because both people feel secure within themselves. It doesn't rely on fantasy because both are grounded in reality. The empath still feels deeply, but now their emotions have direction. They flow rather than drown. Love becomes an exchange of truth, not an exchange of survival tactics. When the super empath embraces this version of love, they stop attracting relationships that drain them. They begin to magnetize partners who are emotionally available, balanced, and ready to meet them as equals. Their depth no longer scares people away. It inspires them. Their sensitivity becomes a strength instead of a burden. Because now, they're no longer seeking to fix anyone, they're inviting someone to grow alongside them. That's the kind of love that breaks generational patterns. It's the kind that doesn't need chaos to feel alive, that doesn't need rescue to feel meaningful. It's a love that exists in the quiet confidence of two people who choose each other freely, not fearfully. Love redefined heals not by completing you, but by reminding you that you were never incomplete to begin with. And when the super empath finally learns to love from overflow rather than emptiness, they don't just end the avoidance cycle, they transform it into something entirely new. When you look at this whole journey, the empath, the avoidant, the dance of fear and love, you start to see that breaking the cycle isn't about fixing someone else. It's about awakening to yourself. It's about realizing that your ability to feel deeply isn't a curse, it's a compass. It's what allows you to see beneath the surface, to understand patterns, to bring awareness into spaces where others only see confusion. The super empath is the only one who can break the avoidance cycle, not because they're better or stronger, but because they see. They see the truth behind the silence, they see the wound behind the distance, and most importantly, they see where they themselves have been chasing love that was never meant to heal them, it was meant to teach them. When you finally understand that, something incredible happens. You stop trying to be the glue that holds everything together and become the gravity that holds yourself together. You stop confusing effort with worth. You stop calling pain passion. You stop begging for love and start being love. Breaking the avoidance cycle doesn't mean walking away from people. It means walking back to yourself. It means reclaiming the parts of you that you gave away just to feel chosen. It means looking in the mirror and saying, I am enough, even when no one is clapping for me. It means choosing peace over patterns, truth over tension, and wholeness over waiting. Because when you do, everything around you begins to change. The relationships that aren't built on reciprocity fall away, and the ones that can meet you where you are begin to grow. You stop chasing people who run from love and start attracting those who run toward it. And that's when you realize you never needed to be rescued. You just needed to remember who you are when you stop running from yourself. So to every empath who has loved too much, waited too long, and carried too heavy a heart, your depth is not a weakness. It's your superpower. Use it not to fix others, but to free yourself. Because when you heal, the pattern breaks. And when the pattern breaks, love finally becomes what it was always meant to be. Safe, steady, and shared. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to see yourself in this. Thank you for caring enough to learn how to love differently, not just others, but yourself. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that real love doesn't require you to lose yourself. The moment you start loving from a place of wholeness, you stop repeating the past and start creating something entirely new. So here's to awareness, to healing, and to love that feels like peace. Thank you, truly,